They say that the pen is mightier than the sword, but the truth is, according to the Torah, the spoken word is the mightiest of all. And the spoken word can be a very dangerous thing. Most people might regard idle speech as not having that much consequence, doesn't really matter. A lot of people aren't careful about how they talk. But in the world of the Torah, in the world of Jewish tradition, there are very specific guidelines for what type of speech is permitted and what type is forbidden. And this is an entire course of study. And there is a very large area of human endeavor, an area of speech known in Hebrew as Lashon Hara, which means literally evil speech. And when we speak Lashon Hara, evil speech about someone, it's not that we're speaking a lie, it's not that we're not telling the truth. That would be a lie. Lashon Hara actually is when we're telling the truth about someone, but it is damaging, it is disparaging, it can hurt someone. And we have very specific traditions and guidelines and laws for how we are supposed to watch ourselves and be careful with what we say so that we don't inadvertently, or God forbid on purpose, hurt anyone. You know, the psalmist tells us in the book of Psalms, Psalms 37, who is the man who wants to live? And David tells us, Nitzor lishoncha meira. Guard your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking guile. And this is the prescription that the book of Psalms gives us for being able to lengthen our days, to be able to live a long and happy and healthy life, to be careful how we talk about other people. In this week's Torah portion, we begin to study the laws of the leper, the Mitzorah. In the portion of Tazria and also in Mitzorah, we're going to be learning about this disease that the Torah describes, where a person is struck with what is commonly translated into English as leprosy, but actually it's a particular type of disease which doesn't exist in our time, and our sages make a direct link between this disease, which would show up in a person's body, and the prohibition of speaking Lashon Hara, evil speech. And our sages explain that this type of leprosy, let's call it tzarat, was visited upon a person in the fashion of midah keneged midah, God's attribute of retribution known as measure for measure. In punishment for speaking idly about other people, a person would be struck with this disease. Person then, as we read in these Torah portions, has to be isolated from the camp, has to live apart until he is diagnosed as having been cured. And so too, when we speak ill of another person, we cause that person damage, he becomes ostracized from the community, he becomes separated. So perhaps in going through the motions of having to deal with this disease, the person begins to understand exactly how he affected this other person, and that's why it's called measure for measure. Measure for measure is a concept that we find in the Torah, that we are taught that God always punishes in this fashion, and it's a concept of reciprocity. In other words, if a person sins in a certain measure, it's exactly in that area, in that realm, that he will be punished. And there's actually a very kind of chilling teaching that our sages share on this very concept, the concept of the horrible sin of speaking ill about another person. Our sages teach us that there is an angel of accusation in heaven. And his job in the heavenly court is to stand as the attorney, kind of as the accusing attorney against every person, and to read before God a listing of all of the foibles of this person, everything that he's done wrong. He has a whole portfolio there, and God constantly reviews and judges every person. And this accuser, it's his job to stand and list orally the things that a person has done wrong. Well, our sages tell us something really incredible. They tell us that as long as a person never speaks ill about someone else, a person doesn't indulge in Lashon Hara, well, that person might do all kinds of really bad things. But as long as he doesn't speak Lashon Hara, the accusing angel, he remains silent. He's not allowed to utter a word. He doesn't open his mouth. and his portfolio stays closed. But a person might be really righteous and might do everything by the book and might do all of the mitzvot, all of the commandments, might be a really great guy. But if he speaks bad about other people, then the accusing angel is given permission to speak about him, because it's measure for measure. If you speak, he's allowed to speak. But if you're quiet, then he stays quiet too. And so really the key to a happy, healthy life is to be more conscious about how we treat other people with our own tongue, which is mightier than the pen and the sword, and to be careful and remember, he who really wants to live guards his tongue from speaking evil.